The FIFA World Cup has always been a stage where fairy tales come to life. And heading into the 2026 tournament, one of the most fascinating stories belongs to a country many people have never even heard of, Cape Verde. Or should we say Cabo Verde? Even the name sparks debate. Portuguese speakers usually say Cabo Verde, while many English speakers pronounce it Cape Verde. In this video, we'll use Cabo Verde, the country's official name. When the World Cup draw was announced, countless people rushed to Google asking the same question. Where's Cabo Verde? That's hardly surprising. This isn't a football giant like Brazil, Argentina, Germany, or Spain. In fact, many people couldn't even point it out on a world map. Surely it must be tiny. And it is. Yet this tiny nation is now sharing the biggest stage in world football with some of the sport's greatest powers. Simply qualifying for the World Cup is already an incredible achievement. But what makes the story even more remarkable is that Cabo Verde isn't a wealthy country, nor does it have a huge population. The country is home to just over 500,000 people. That's smaller than the population of many cities around the world. In terms of population, Cabo Verde is one of the smallest nations ever to reach the FIFA World Cup. And that's exactly what makes its story so inspiring. Because football has always reminded us that size isn't everything. A small island nation in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean can stand shoulder to shoulder with football's biggest powers, if it develops the game the right way. So where exactly is Cabo Verde? Technically, it's an African country. But if you search across mainland Africa, you won't find it. That's because Cabo Verde isn't located on the continent at all. Instead, it sits roughly 370 miles, or about 600 kilometers, off the coast of Senegal in the Atlantic Ocean. Scattered across the ocean are 10 main volcanic islands and several smaller ones. Together, they form the Republic of Cabo Verde. The country's total land area is just over 4,000 square kilometers, making it smaller than many individual counties or provinces around the world. From the capital city of Praia to Lisbon, Portugal, is only about 3,000 kilometers. That relatively short distance has shaped Cabo Verde's history for centuries. Its location once made it one of the most important stopping points along Atlantic shipping routes. During the age of exploration, sailing ships traveling between Europe, Africa, and the Americas frequently stopped here to refill fresh water, repair their vessels, and restock supplies before continuing their journeys across the ocean. Even today, Cabo Verde's strategic position gives it advantages far beyond what its small size might suggest. It sits at the crossroads between Europe, West Africa, and the Atlantic. That location has helped the country become much more significant in trade and transportation than its population alone would imply. But perhaps the most unusual thing about Cabo Verde isn't where it is. It's how the country came into existence. Unlike almost every other nation on Earth, Cabo Verde had no indigenous population. When Portuguese explorers first arrived here during the 15th century, they found something incredibly rare. The islands were completely uninhabited. There were no villages, no tribes, no ancient civilizations, no native communities whatsoever. Only volcanic mountains rising from the Atlantic Ocean. The Portuguese soon established settlements, bringing merchants, sailors, farmers, and colonists from Europe. At the same time, enslaved Africans from West Africa were brought to the islands through the transatlantic slave trade. Over the centuries, these different communities gradually blended together. The result is the Cabo Verdean people we know today. That's why the country's population is so diverse. Some people have features that clearly reflect their West African ancestry. Others look more Southern European. Many have a rich mixture of both. Few countries in the world display such a unique blend of African and European heritage. That cultural mix can be seen everywhere, from the language and music to the architecture, cuisine, and traditions. Even a national flag tells part of this story. Take a look at the flags of many African nations, and you'll notice familiar colors such as red, yellow, green, and black. Cabo Verde chose something very different. Blue dominates its flag. That blue represents the Atlantic Ocean surrounding the islands. For Cabo Verdeans, the sea isn't just part of the landscape. It's their way of life. Fishing, shipping, trade, tourism. Nearly every aspect of the country's economy depends on the ocean. The white stripes across the flag symbolize peace. The red stripe represents determination and progress. And the circle of 10 yellow stars stands for the country's 10 main inhabited islands. Just by looking at the flag, you can see how proud Cabo Verde is of its island identity. The ocean doesn't separate the country. It connects it. It has shaped Cabo Verde's history, its economy, its culture, and ultimately its place in the world. For a nation so small, that's an extraordinary story. But what's even more surprising is how this tiny island country transformed itself into one of Africa's most stable nations, and eventually into a World Cup qualifier. And that's where the story gets even more interesting. Now let's talk about something every country is judged by: its economy. Is Cabo Verde rich? The short answer is no. Compared to developed European nations, Cabo Verde is a relatively small economy. Its GDP is only a few $billions, and unlike many resource-rich countries, it doesn't sit on massive reserves of oil, natural gas, gold, or diamonds. At first glance, that sounds like a disadvantage. But compared with many countries across Africa, Cabo Verde tells a very different story. Despite its limited natural resources, it is consistently ranked as one of the continent's most stable and well-governed nations. Political stability, high literacy rates, a relatively long life expectancy, strong democratic institutions. These are all areas where Cabo Verde performs remarkably well. And that's what makes its success so interesting. The country couldn't rely on natural resources to build its future, so it had to find another path. Instead of exporting oil, it began exporting experiences. Tourism became one of Cabo Verde's greatest strengths. If you've ever seen photos of the islands, you'll probably understand why. Endless white sand beaches, crystal clear Atlantic waters, volcanic mountains rising dramatically from the ocean, and warm sunshine almost every day of the year. To many Europeans, Cabo Verde feels like a more affordable version of the Caribbean. It's only a few hours away by plane from Portugal, Spain, France, or the United Kingdom. That makes it an ideal vacation destination. Every year, millions of tourists visit the islands. For a country with only about 500,000 residents, that's an extraordinary number of visitors. Tourism has become the backbone of the economy. Hotels, restaurants, transportation, fishing tool, water sports, local businesses. Hundreds of millions of dollars flow into the country thanks to travelers looking for sunshine and beautiful beaches. In many ways, tourism plays the same role in Cabo Verde that oil plays in some Middle Eastern countries. It creates jobs, it generates foreign currency, and it supports much of the national economy. But tourism isn't the country's only secret weapon. There's something even more remarkable. Today, more people of Cabo Verdean descent actually live outside the country than inside it. Think about that for a second. The country itself has just over 500,000 people. Yet nearly 1 million Cabo Verdeans and their descendants live abroad. Large communities can be found in Portugal, France, the Netherlands, the United States, and several other countries around the world. How did that happen? For generations, many Cabo Verdeans left the islands in search of better economic opportunities. Some became sailors. Others found work in Europe or North America. Many eventually settled overseas and built new lives. But they never forgot where they came from. They stayed connected to their homeland. They sent money back to their families. They invested in local communities. And they proudly preserved their culture and traditions. Those financial transfers, known as remittances, have become one of the country's most important sources of income. Every year, millions of dollars flow back into Cabo Verde from citizens living abroad. For many families, that money helps pay for education, healthcare, housing, and everyday living expenses. It's a remarkable example of how a global community can support a small nation. But perhaps the greatest benefit of this worldwide diaspora isn't financial. It's human capital. Children of Cabo Verdean families often grow up in some of Europe's strongest educational systems. They speak multiple languages. They gain international experience. And many of them eventually reconnect with their ancestral homeland. That has had an enormous impact on one particular area: football. Because while Cabo Verde may have only 500,000 people living on the islands, its global community is nearly 3 times that size. And that dramatically expands the country's talent pool. Suddenly, this tiny nation isn't limited to developing players from just 500,000 residents. It can also draw from talented young athletes growing up in Portugal, France, the Netherlands, and beyond. That advantage would eventually change the future of Cabo Verdean football. And it's one of the biggest reasons why this tiny island nation managed to qualify for the biggest sporting event on Earth. Because sometimes, a country's greatest resource isn't buried underground. It's the people who carry its identity wherever they go. So how does a country with barely 500,000 people qualify for the FIFA World Cup? At first glance, it doesn't seem possible. Football is often described as a numbers game. Countries with larger populations naturally have bigger talent pools. Brazil has more than 200 million people. Germany has over 80 million. Spain, France, England, Argentina, they all have tens of millions of potential players to choose from. Cabo Verde? Just over 500,000. On paper, they shouldn't even be in the conversation. But football isn't played on paper. And Cabo Verde discovered a way to overcome one of the biggest disadvantages in international sports. The answer lies far beyond the islands themselves. Remember the massive Cabo Verdean community living overseas? That diaspora has become one of the country's greatest football assets. Many of Cabo Verde's best players weren't actually born on the islands. Instead, they were born and raised in countries like Portugal, France, the Netherlands, Belgium, and even the United States. Growing up in Europe gave them opportunities that would have been difficult to find back home. They trained in professional academies. They played against elite competition from a young age. They learned modern tactics, advanced coaching methods, and the fast-paced style of European football. Some eventually signed with clubs in Portugal's Primeira Liga. Others played in France's Ligue 1, the Dutch Eredivisie, Belgium's Pro League, and other competitive European leagues. By the time they reached international level, many had already spent years playing professional football. Then came an important decision. Which national team should they represent? For some players, the answer was simple. Instead of waiting for a chance to play for Portugal or France, where competition is incredibly fierce, they chose to represent the homeland of their parents and grandparents. Cabo Verde. It wasn't just about football. It was about family, identity, heritage. Many players speak proudly about visiting the islands during childhood, spending summers with relatives, and feeling a deep emotional connection to a country they may not have been born in. Pulling on the blue jersey isn't simply another international appearance. For many of them, it's a way of honoring where their family came from. That emotional connection has helped build a remarkably united national team. And while European training has raised the overall quality of the squad, football passion has always existed on the islands themselves. Soccer is, without question, the country's most popular sport. Nearly every island has its own local clubs and competitions. Children grow up playing football in neighborhoods, on beaches, and in schoolyards. Professional facilities may be limited compared to Europe, but enthusiasm certainly isn't. Football is woven into everyday life. It's played after school, on weekends, during local festivals. Wherever there's an open space and a ball, you'll usually find a game. That passion creates a strong football culture from an early age. Then, when talented young players move abroad, or when children of Cabo Verdean families are born overseas, the country gains access to both local passion and world-class development systems. It's a powerful combination. One provides identity. The other provides opportunity. Together, they've transformed Cabo Verde into one of Africa's fastest rising football nations. By the time World Cup qualification arrived, this wasn't just a team hoping for a miracle. It was a disciplined, organized squad filled with experienced professionals who had spent years competing at high levels. Still, almost nobody expected them to qualify. Most predictions favored Africa's traditional football powers. Once again, Cabo Verde was overlooked, and perhaps that became its greatest advantage. There was almost no pressure. Nobody expected them to make history. Nobody demanded deep tournament runs. Nobody believed they belonged among football's elite. That freedom allowed the players to focus on one thing: playing fearless football. Sometimes, the most dangerous team isn't the favorite. It's the one with nothing to lose. For the people of Cabo Verde, simply seeing their national flag displayed alongside the world's biggest football nations is already a historic achievement. Imagine that for a moment. A country with barely 500,000 people, now standing on the same stage as global football giants watched by billions of viewers around the world. For many fans, this may be their very first time hearing the name Cabo Verde. And that's exactly what makes the World Cup so special. Every 4 years, it reminds us that football isn't just about trophies. It's about stories. Stories of underdogs. Stories of impossible dreams. Stories that inspire millions of people who never imagined they could compete with the biggest names in the world. And in 2026, few stories are more remarkable than Cabo Verde's. Because sometimes, the smallest countries tell the biggest stories. Before we wrap up, here are a few fascinating facts that make Cabo Verde even more remarkable. First, despite its small size, Cabo Verde is home to one of the world's most important nesting sites for loggerhead sea turtles. Every year, tens of thousands of female turtles return from across the Atlantic Ocean to lay their eggs on the beaches of Boa Vista Island. In fact, Boa Vista is considered one of the 3 largest loggerhead nesting sites anywhere on Earth. For marine biologists and conservationists, these islands are incredibly important. Each nesting season, volunteers from around the world travel here to help protect endangered turtles and ensure that the next generation safely reaches the ocean. It's one of Cabo Verde's greatest natural treasures. Second, the country is home to an active volcano. Pico do Fogo rises nearly 2,830 meters above sea level, making it the tallest mountain in Cabo Verde. And unlike many famous volcanoes that have remained dormant for centuries, Pico do Fogo is still active. Its most recent eruption occurred in 2014, forcing nearby villages to evacuate as lava flowed down the mountainside. Living on a volcanic island certainly has its challenges. But over generations, the people of Cabo Verde have learned to adapt. Third, one of history's greatest scientists visited these islands long before he changed the world. In 1832, a young Charles Darwin stopped in Praia during the famous voyage of HMS Beagle. Cabo Verde became one of the very first places Darwin explored on what would eventually become one of the most important scientific expeditions in history. Many historians believe that observations made during this journey helped shape the ideas that later evolved into the theory of evolution. It's amazing to think that one of science's greatest revolutions has a small connection to these tiny Atlantic islands. Here's another surprising fact. Only about 10% of Cabo Verde's land is suitable for farming. The combination of volcanic terrain and a dry climate leaves very little fertile land for agriculture. As a result, the country imports much of its food. Yet despite these natural limitations, Cabo Verde consistently ranks among Africa's most stable and best-governed nations. It regularly scores highly in areas such as democracy, political stability, education, and quality of life. For a country with so few natural resources, that's an extraordinary achievement. And finally, Cabo Verde has given its name to one of the most powerful weather phenomena on Earth. Meteorologists use the term Cape Verde hurricanes to describe tropical storms that form near the islands before crossing the Atlantic Ocean. Many of the strongest hurricanes ever recorded, including some of the most destructive storms in modern history, began their lives in this region. It's a reminder that these tiny islands have influenced the world in more ways than most people realize. So when the 2026 FIFA World Cup begins, Cabo Verde will almost certainly be one of the tournament's smallest nations. In terms of population, they'll sit near the very bottom of the list. Yet they'll walk onto the same field as some of the biggest names in world football. That's the magic of the World Cup. It isn't only about the countries expected to win. It's about giving every nation a chance to dream. A country of just 500,000 people, standing shoulder to shoulder with football giants, introducing itself to billions of viewers around the globe. For many fans, this tournament will be the first time they've ever heard the name Cabo Verde. But after hearing its story, it's a name they probably won't forget. Because sometimes the world's smallest countries leave the biggest impressions. And that's exactly why stories like this deserve to be told. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed learning about Cabo Verde, be sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this video with someone who loves discovering the hidden stories behind our world. Here at World of Why, every country has a story, and every story begins with one simple question. Why? Until next time, keep asking questions, keep exploring, and we'll see you in the next video.